Hello, and welcome to a new episode of All the Mods 9. Sorry I've been gone a little while. There have been quite a bit of things changing, as well as some things happening in real life. To go over some of them between episodes, if you didn't notice, there was a new update that dropped. This update added a lot of things. So there's now a Mahao Sukai chapter in the quest book. There's also an Eidolon Reprise chapter. And Industrial Foregoing had a huge renovation done to it. And it now has rewards. It's awesome. So it actually looks like there's a lot of new things in here. It's I'm excited. Hostile Neural Networks is in here. This thing looks amazing. Just all the different predictions lined up with the piglet in the center. It's beautiful. On top of that, there have been some updates to things like the Micro Universe Orb. To craft it, it's still a lot. It's this massive, massive multi block. But you'll notice there are some new recipes to make things like creative energy from Greg Tech. You'll need to make a Greg Star block. 32 of these 16 amp UHV energy converters. You can also make a max energy hatch. The energy tiers in Greg Tech, they go from UHV all the way to max. And Greg Tech did update. You'll see there's this new like overclock thing. So you can see it goes at the highest tier is max. One below that is, I don't know what these stand for, OPV, UXV, UIV, UEV, back to UHV. But you'll notice these things got buffed. Instead of giving nuggets, they give full ingots. They give much more ore. You can make new creative items. Additionally, something I worked on was to make the Apiary. Unfortunately, they don't work consistently yet. We're waiting on an update from Greg Tech that should allow them to support partial NBT ingredients. What I mean by that is, right now, Greg Tech will just look at the fact that this is a bee cage and a barium block. And it might work. It might also get confused because a bee cage, well, this is also a bee cage. It's the NBT that tells that specifies what kind of bee is stored in it. It tells it it's a barium bee or a rubidium bee. And it has to be a partial match because generally bees have many more NBT tags than just the 3 that are listed on this recipe. But you'll notice it has a 1% chance, and what that means for the input is it's a 1% chance of consuming the bee. And every overclock increases that chance by 0.5%. So the Mark 1 apiary, it doesn't matter what kind of bee you put in it. You can put in, a bee that you just caught, and it'll work with it. And it'll run constantly, regardless of whether or not it's raining or thunderstorming, whether or not it's day or night, regardless of the bee's own behavior and productivity. It will run and produce comb blocks. But the trade off is it has a chance of consuming the bee. The other thing to notice with the Mark 1 is it allows for a parallel control hatch. These things, yeah, they don't come into play until at least LuV. But it does mean you could take, I think at the highest tier of a parallel hatch, allows 256 recipes in parallel. So what that means is you could have 256 bees in one of these apiaries with just one flower, and it'll produce 256 comb blocks. But if it hits that chance of consuming the input, it will consume all of the input, all 256 bees. So it's risky. The Apiary Mark II, however, you see comes out at EV, requires these Omega upgrades, whereas the Mark I was MV, uses block upgrades and simulator upgrades. But the Mark II, you can see this is what it looks like. If we go through it, there's a layer of dirt, there's a flower, it doesn't matter what flower, as well as treated wood frames. The Mark II, on the other hand, you can have at most 32 bees in one Mark II apiary. However, it does require that your bees are all very high productivity, that they have any for their weather tolerance, and that they are metaternal. So you'll notice that these guys have 6 tags specified. It's still partial, so it's still going to be really inconsistent on whether or not it works without a GT update. And to be specific, I'm on GT 1.2.0.a, I want to say. I'll put it in the description. I actually updated my specific instance to use one of their development builds, and I'll also put that in the description, which build specifically I'm using, because it is something they fixed already, they just haven't put a release out. But the Mark II apiary, you can put anywhere between 1 to 32 bees in, and you'll need to put in productivity upgrades as well, and it has no chance of consuming the bee, no chance of consuming the upgrades, no chance of consuming the flower, and it just produces the comb blocks, as well as any secondary outputs they may have. And you'll notice it requires the Omega upgrades as if you had that many hives full of bees. So here, 28 bees would be, you would need at least 6 hives. 6 hives, each holding 4 upgrades, means you need 24 Omega productivity upgrades. Same for 26, same for 27, same for 29. But if you had 25 or 24, that number changes to just 20. The Mark II apiary, you cannot put a parallel hatch on. So that just won't work. One of the downsides to this is the bees have to have the correct name. It is just a byproduct of how I put it together, unfortunately. So like they all have to be named Silky Bee, and you can only use one type of bee per apiary. So if you have 5 bees, 5 different bee types, you have to have 5 different apiaries for each, one for each type. and they all have to have the right names. I think that only really becomes an issue if you get a special bee. For example, the water bee can have special names that are not accounted for, unless it's just called water bee. They don't have to stack like they show here. They don't. It doesn't matter if they're children or adults. They won't age while they're in there. So if you want them to all be adults, you have to have them either live in the world or live in a hive that's simulated where they can age. And the nice thing about these is it overclocks by a lot. If you couple that with the new creative max tier energy hatch, these things can go very fast. But by default, they go as fast as a regular hive at EV. One of the big updates to GregTech added in research. So you'll find there's now a research station, and it'll have recipes like an LuV dynamo hatch plus a data orb equals ZPM dynamo hatch. This isn't quite right. The ZPM dynamo hatch, you don't get that item by doing this recipe. You get a data orb with the information of how to make a ZPM data hatch. Sorry, dynamo hatch. You get this item. This item is then required to create the ZPM dynamo hatch in the assembly line. So I've also just been putting off LuV for a while. The main reason being LuV introduces the assembly line, and the assembly line requires research now. So I was waiting on this update. I also was working on the Apiary quite a bit. That took a while to get sorted out. But let's look at, say, the LuV field generator that doesn't use a research station. It uses a new block called the scanner. The UV version is the electron microscope. I like that. But essentially it just, you insert a data stick, you give it a lower tier, or exactly one tier lower version of the item you want to make. You wait a while and it will give you a data stick with the recipe for how to make an LuV field generator. You then put that into your assembly line. Your assembly line will then know how to craft it when you provide it with all of these ingredients. So yeah, you'll see a lot of assembly line recipes now require research. One of the other things I did was I added some recipes to the forming press. Namely, the ability to make AE2 circuits, whether they be megacell circuits or AE2 circuits. They should all be in here, as well as the processors. I'm sure you already know the benefit to this is overclocking. Last but not least, one other thing I did was I added some new drops to the Drigme and the Wannabe loot tables, specifically for the Ender Dragon, the Wilden Chimera, the Warden, and the Wither. I wanted to make the items that they drop, if you go through the process of, trapping them in amber or trapping them in a containment jar, those mobs are special in that when they die, they don't access a loot table directly. They have like a death event that makes them drop items. And I essentially wanted to make, if you went through the trouble of trapping them in amber or trapping them in a containment jar successfully, I wanted to make it so that you could farm every item it drops, not just a select few. So I added things like the scale for mystical aggreditions and quark, dropped by the Ender Dragon upon death, and only upon death. So it didn't work before, but now it should. Um, I also added some of the heart canisters to them as well. Things like scales, heart canisters. They should be able to get a wider array of drops. Oh, before I forget, I also made a comb processor. This thing, I'm so proud of it, how it came out. It is a massive multi-block, and it looks like a stand mixer or a KitchenAid, if you're familiar with those. So happy with how it came out. But it runs recipes. It takes, a comb, and it will turn it into uh, whatever it's meant to turn into. It'll take comb blocks. This thing does take a parallel control hatch. It takes the same amount of time as a base centrifuge right now, despite requiring a heated centrifuge. That's something that was an oversight on my part. A future update should fix that. These recipes should be the same speed as a heated centrifuge. So expect to see that in the future. They'll be quite a bit faster. And they can run in parallel. They can overclock considerably fast. And yeah, it's essentially a centrifuge from productive bees, but gigantic. You'll see it uses 153 clean stainless steel, 308 solid machine casing, steel, stainless steel, some honey. It's a big investment. A very big investment. And it is unlocked at technically medium voltage, but realistically, you probably are like just entering high voltage if you're getting stainless steel, since you need high voltage in your blast furnace. Sorry, I've just been rambling about the update. A lot of work went into it. Quite excited about it. Suppose I should get on with the actual episode. Between episodes, I built a new floor. Added a. I don't remember if I did this last episode or went over it last episode. I did build a new floor since we're starting to run out of space downstairs in the basement. And I accidentally broke my fusion reactor by when I built this initially by cutting off the sky access for these solar neutron activators. I should probably give those three sky access as well. Oops. Not that I'm using them right now, but if I ever did want to use them. Between episodes, I added some more oily bees just to ramp up our oil production. I added tropical fish to my wannabe farm so that we would have plenty of tropical fish to make as much like ethanol, lubricant, what have you. Um, I did upgrade some HV machines to IV. Specifically, I'm not sure if I went over this last episode or not. I upgraded these to have IV energy hatches, so now they run at LuV. Same with my blast furnace. I think I missed last episode going over adding a new wire mill and a new bender. Bender is on program 10 to directly make foil. The wire mill's on program 3 to make fine wire for us. I upgraded these to IV so that this blast furnace could operate at LuV. It's a little bit loud, so I'm coming back up to the top here. Um, oh, I ran into a mixer mishap. So the mixer that's over there that I have like 3 program circuits in, it turns out you can't have more than 2 program circuits in it. The ghost circuit and one extra one. Having 3, uh, one of the program circuits gets ignored. And it just uses the other 2. So I'll have to rethink that or just make a new mixer. Not a big deal. I did start working on a neodymium bee. I'm not sure if I made it. I did make it. Uh, the main reason for that is I needed a source of rare earth, and the neodymium bee produces neodymium combs, which produce raw neodymium. If I crush that, you can see all the byproducts here, no matter which route I take, will give me rare earth. And you need rare earth because when you centrifuge it, that's where you get cadmium, that's where you can get more neodymium, that's where you get samarium, lanthanum, yttrium, and cerium. Yttrium, samarium, and I think lanthanum will definitely be coming in handy. Same with the neodymium. I'm not sure about cerium and cadmium. We'll probably find out when we get there. Oh, and last but not least, I made a couple of these world accelerators because I was tired of waiting on bees. So now the breeding chamber is much faster for me. If I just show real quick, it takes hardly any time at all. Same for the incubator, if I wanted to incubate some babies. Now, I believe there's also an issue on the currently released version of GregTech where world accelerators use more power than they're meant to. It has been fixed, and it's since I'm using a development version, I should have the fix. Um, I think it's just it consumes too much power. Otherwise, they work as intended. But yeah, let's talk about what the actual plans are for this episode. Or I guess I should recap last episode. Last episode was Apotheosis. We did some IV. We got our nano circuits. We finished IV, I should say. This episode, I want to start up LuV. I want to get to the assembly line. Which is right here, the assembly line. I have some lofty goals. I'm not sure we'll hit all of them this episode, but the assembly line is definitely one of them. Start working on LuV circuits, get a bunch of those going, make ourselves this alloy blast smelter. This alloy blast smelter is required for most of these multi-blocks. And start setting up multi-blocks. I think the main benefit to multi-blocks here, for example, I'll pick the large engraving laser. This thing is a laser engraver that is big. You would make this because it can accept the parallel control hatch, so it can run 4 recipes in parallel. The 4 recipes in parallel is equivalent to overclocking it once, but you don't get the benefit of overclocking it. If that makes sense, like it doesn't process at the overclock speed. It processes at the regular speed, but you need to provide it with the higher amperage to run all 4 recipes. But you'd still make this large engraving laser, this multi-block, namely because you'll notice it can have 50 of these laser-safe engraving casings, and JEI says it takes 60 to build. So what that really means for us is we can have 10 input buses. Each input bus can be put on distinct mode. Distinct mode just means, I think it's 10. Might be less than 10. Just means that each input bus is treated separately for recipes. The reason you would do that is because the laser engraver, each laser engraver takes a different lens to make a different wafer. It like etches a different wafer in. So it's similar to different program circuits. So you need to have each input bus treated distinctly or separately. If you give one input bus the diamond lens and then you give it a wafer, you need to make sure it produces the correct recipe, and that the other input bus with like an orange lens doesn't somehow override it. So distinct bus mode definitely comes in handy there, and it collapses 10 different large engraver and laser engravers into one machine. The other benefit of this is this machine can take up to 2 energy hatches. So we can overclock the machine, and every time we want to upgrade it, all we have to do is replace the energy hatches. We don't have to replace the whole machine. We don't have to make a new machine for it. We just replace the energy hatch. So I think we'll be going for multi-blocks, as many as we can. And for that, we need the alloy blast smelter. One of the downsides to having gone with a development build, and this may just happen from updates as well, something changed where my machines that used to have covers on them have somehow disappeared. Their configurations have reset. It's not all of them, but it is many of them. So, for example, this mixer has a level emitter for tungsten steel ingots. It used to auto output directly into the top here. It used to have a robot arm on the top to pull in a specific amount of steel and a specific amount of tungsten dust. And it used to have a machine controller on the front here to turn the machine off when we had over 10,000 tungsten steel ingots. The covers have disappeared and the configuration for the machine reset. And I think that happened to many of the machines, but not all of them, so I'm going to have to go through, unfortunately, every machine we've made so far and double check the configuration. It's going to take me a minute, so I'll be back after I've gone through and checked and every machine is configured correctly. Wish me luck. Alright, we're back. I believe I've configured all the machines to be set up correctly again. You'll notice that the face of it looks a little bit different. That's because of the machine controller cover. So it took a while, but it's working for the most part. I thought. Okay, now it's definitely working. I hope. Anyway, moving swiftly onwards. The assembly line. The assembly line multi-block. I'm going to make use of a little trick here. So I clicked this P button a whole bunch until it had 13 input buses. The main reason I did that was I just kind of looked through all the assembly line recipes, and it looks like at most they have 13 inputs. The assembly line, you have to use these ULV input buses. They have to go on the bottom here. And the output bus can be bigger than ULV. But essentially the idea is like you put one item in and it does that little bit of the recipe, then it moves to the next item, and so on and so forth. Which is why you have to do one item in here. We're gonna set this guy up. And I'm gonna use the terminal to build it. It's probably not gonna work on the first try. We'll have to like edit it. But looking at the pattern for this, I can see this guy's 3 blocks tall, or the third block 4 blocks tall, but the third block here is the controller. It's located on the far right. So I'm going to place the controller up here. And my reasoning here is this will give me 2 blocks of clearance so I can get under the machine with ease. And I'm going to use this terminal. So the terminal lets you auto build multi-blocks. If I have nothing in my hand and I crouch and right click, it'll create a little hologram. We already know we want it to be bigger than this, but that's fine. If I keep right clicking, it shows you layer by layer what it looks like. But if I use the terminal, which is just some screws, plates, a book, pretty easy to make, and I crouch and right click, it's going to use the items that are in my inventory to build the multi-block for me. So we've got our data access hatch. I made 9 data sticks. Since this can only hold 9, we'll have to research things and start putting them in there. You can see it took the 2 IV energy hatches and put them on, which is ideal for us. What it didn't do was build it as long as I wanted it to be. So it also doesn't appear to have put down the input hatches for fluids, which is fine. We'll just extend this guy out to be the 13 long that I wanted. And we'll extend all of these out. Pretty straightforward stuff. Now the tricky part here is going to be wiring this. I guess I should also go ahead and give it power. But wiring this won't be too bad for us. We can use a subnet to wire it. The main reason I left this gap here was so I could easily walk down for what I'm about to do. So similarly to how we set up our electric blast furnaces, we'll do the same thing here, which means I need an interface, and I need it to be flat. This interface I'm also going to need to give power. Probably do that from below. That'll be fine. And we're going to need a new color. I'll choose brown. Brown and blue. We're going to need a whole bunch of storage buses. We're going to need an ME controller. Sorry, just trying to count more or less. Personally, I don't like it when they connect like this. I'd rather it just connect in one spot. What I'll do, I'm going to need one more color. We can use orange. But the assembly line is particular about where inputs go, so I'll set priorities. The first one should have the highest priority, then one lower to 0. These are just for the fluids. For the inputs, we have to go up to 12, then 11, 10, and so on. So since this is all on the same subnetwork, whenever we put a recipe in our pattern provider, or whenever we call a recipe in here, it'll push to the interface. The interface is not configured as before. It will automatically push to all available storage slots, which will be all of these storage buses. These things can only store one item, and since we put the priority such that the highest priority is all the way over here, this should always get the first item, and it will go through and fill all of these up. The last thing for us to do, we can't use blocking mode. So how we had set this up to use locking, or to lock crafting, we'll have to do that as well. We'll have to take the output bus and put a storage bus on the pattern provider on another subnet. Which is easy enough. We'll take yellow. I need one more storage bus, one more interface, and that quartz fiber. Now we can make recipes for this, like the robot arm, the electric motor. These things don't require research, at least not at first. The piston, same idea. We'll have to go through and bookmark all of these components and actually start making them. But yeah, the assembly line is completed. I guess the next thing for us is the alloy blast smelter. I think I can make that in this area as well. This guy's 5 wide. Since I have all the blocks with me, I can just crouch, right click it with the terminal. And that almost made it. Huh. Or what it's missing. Probably inputs and outputs. And a muffler hatch. I seem to have forgotten the muffler hatch. That's okay though. We'll set this up shortly. Unfortunately, there is no overclocking for it. I said overclocking, I mean, you can't put a parallel control hatch on it. The quests are a little bit harder to follow, in my opinion. Mainly because the ludicrous voltage coil here, it doesn't tell you you need the LuV assembler to make this. Because I was looking at the LuV energy hatch. It does require research. We can see the scanner. You have to scan an IV energy hatch for it. But it also requires this ludicrous voltage coil, which requires an LuV assembler. I think I preferred when the quest showed you the machine you needed. Personal preference. I'll go ahead and fix this and set up the recipe or the pattern provider for it. And I'll be back in a jiff. Alright, so just like that, I set up 2 pattern providers for it, each with an input hatch and an input bus, using the old interface storage bus trick. One of them I have not configured. The input bus I did set distinct buses to yes, because the other one is set to distinct buses yes, and has a circuit specified, circuit 12, to make the molten titanium tungsten carbide. See, there's a circuit 2 recipe and a circuit 12 with argon. I figure we have the argon, might as well. And distinct bus mode will essentially let this one work on circuit 12, and whenever I end up populating this with recipes, work on whatever circuit it's set to. I also built a vacuum freezer over here, put a casting mold for ingots in it, and it just takes molten titanium tungsten carbide, should push that into the input hatch. The output bus will then give you the ingot. And lastly, I made a little scanner, and you see it says it contains construction data for the LuV energy hatch. So the way I did that, you see it's what's used in the assembly line here, was I used a data stick and an IV energy hatch, and it didn't make this LuV energy hatch, it made a data stick with the construction data for an LuV energy hatch. Bit of a mouthful, but I can put that into here, into my data access hatch on my assembly line. And now if I had a recipe for making these, it would be able to. It won't be able to in our case because I don't have this ludicrous voltage coil, but I did add a couple recipes. These things don't require patterns. So let's go ahead and make the titanium tungsten carbide ingot as well as some LuV components just to have them, to see these machines in action. That was very fast for making this thing. And eventually one of these. All right, I have to cancel this. Start cooking some samarium. So I didn't go over the samarium at all. I added a little setup over here where I take that neodymium, I just crush it, pass that straight into the ore washer. The crushed neodymium ore makes stone dust, rare earth sometimes, and purified neodymium ore. I just put all of that into an interface and then have another interface that stocks purified neodymium ore to then pull into the thermal centrifuge. This guy makes refined neodymium ore and sometimes rare earth and pushes back into the interface. This interface stocks refined neodymium ore, which then macerates into neodymium dust and occasionally rare earth dust. One more interface, we've got rare earth being stocked, and it's being pulled in. All of these things are being pulled in with robot arms into a centrifuge to give us small piles of stuff. Of cadmium, neodymium, samarium, cerium, yttrium, and lanthanum. And just like that, the assembly line's able to work. So we're giving it the samarium it needs. You can see we've already got a little pile going. Nearly 3,000 small piles, which is like 700 or so piles of samarium dust, are like the regular size. But yeah, we're able to make components for LuV machines now. And I think I'm going to call the episode here. Next time we're going to get into actually making LuV single block machines like the assembler so that we can make this ludicrous voltage coil. Maybe some other LuV single blocks, we will see. I also want to get the large engraving laser going, get that set up in our clean room since we have so much space for it. So I can get rid of all of these laser engravers and replace them with the one multi-block. I think that'll be some nice goals for us next episode. But as always, if you stuck around to this point, thank you for watching. Hope you have a marvelous rest of your day. Bye bye.